tell people what about the Rehabilitation Project Force, how that came about, and what was the intention?
It came about because there was a flap on shore, and there was one of the juniors in the port captain's office was involved and apparently had goofed up. LRH handled the flap, as he always did. He was brilliant at doing that, by the way. And he told the port captain to do an evaluation, which he did. And he sent up the evaluation to LRH, and LRH approved it, but he added a target to the port captain's program, which was, and it ordered me to fix the case on post situation on the ship.
What does case on post mean?
It means you have an excuse for not doing your job or for goofing up. And it's, yeah. Well, this guy had said he was very tired when he had committed the goof on shore. And that as far as the Commodore was concerned, was case on post. So I got to work on it immediately. And I had a very clear concept of what I wanted to do. And I wrote it up within a few hours, all in one go. Luckily, I had the time. I was left free. And I sent it down to Mimeo. It got approved, came back up. And the next day, he wanted to see it. So he saw it, and he sent a message to say it was very well done.
Okay.
The idea was...
I was going to show some of everybody here. This is the messenger, right, Janis, who came down. That was Jill Goodman?
Yeah,
Yes.
Jill Goodman was the messenger. I was actually on watch with her. She was my second.
Okay.
And this was when he was down in his room on the A deck, nursing his injury.
Yeah, his injuries from the motorbike accident. So this would have been late 1973.
Yeah. What I did was I knew I had to do something that fitted the Sea Org tradition and culture. But I didn't want to make it cruel or gross or unproductive. I wanted the people who were struggling to have a chance to sort themselves out, under guidance, but on their own feet. I wanted them to experience some training, but also auditing to address their situations and to get them moving up on the bridge. And I wanted them also to take the responsibility of helping a fellow crew member with I wanted them to co-audit. So they'd have that responsibility and that experience of bringing about good results on a fellow crew member.
This is a photograph sort of showing co-auditing. They're not actually co-auditing, but basically you sat across from each other and you would audit each other. And then when one was done auditing the lady there, then they would switch around and then the lady would audit the man. And basically you'd take responsibility for each other. Isn't that right?
That's right. And these people were not trained auditors. So the system we adopted was that whatever they needed to know about in order to do the CS for the session on their twin, they would read that and drill it and then go into session and do it. And that was done session by session according to what they needed to know.
Right.
So that really was all there was to it. I divided their day up into two parts. And the RPF was divided into two halves. One half would spend the morning or the earlier part of the day doing mess work, mostly cleaning.
Yeah, messed work is like physical labor, right? Cleaning,
Yeah.
painting, doing all sorts of stuff like that, right?
Yes. And the other half of the RPF during that period, they would be doing their tech stuff. They'd be doing their co-auditing and whatever else was going on to get them through their programs.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the afternoon, the two halves of the RPF would switch places. So each half of the RPF got its mess work and its tech work done every day. And the guiding principle for the mess work was that they should be completing actions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how it began, how it started.
I was going to say one other thing too is that when you were on the RPF, you actually got to sleep because they basically, you had to be sessionable. So I remember, you know, when I was on the RPF years later, I mean, you got a full night's sleep.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Now, there were a couple of things I put in on that flag order that later on I really regretted.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them was that the RPF was to be fed on what was left over after the crew was fed. Now, I took that from a much earlier Sea Org flag order, which had to do with people being in the chain locker.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that there'd be more than 2 or 3 people in the RPF at once. But in actual fact, there were more, but there was no situation with regard to there being fed leftovers or slops, because there were so many of the RPF people who helped out the chief steward so much. He was really appreciative. He fed them well. But of course, when looking back, you can always say, well, he was always given money per head to spend on the food.
Mm-hmm.
So he had the money to spend anyway. But there was, I didn't bother with revising the flag order to take out that stuff about the leftovers because there was no situation. There was no need to, and I had very many other things to do. But I wish I hadn't put it in.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first RPF graduate was actually Claire Popham. I remember there was a routing form that came to me that I had a messenger, a young girl, I've forgotten her name. I don't think she ever made Commodore's messenger. I think her name began with a P. Penny or something like that. Anyway, she brings me this routing form. It was from Claire, who was on the prom deck at the door on the starboard side, and I was the last signature on the completion form for the RPF. And I remember rather nastily, I signed it, and I decided I would not go out and speak to Claire for various reasons. And because one reason was I thought, well, if I did that, then I'd have to go and speak to them all, always. And I wasn't sure that I always wanted to or would have the time. Anyway, I gave it back to the messenger and I said, hand this back to Claire with a long face. So she did that. I heard her open the door and then she screamed with laughter because, of course, Poppy saw the long face and thought she'd been refused. But then she saw I'd okayed it, so they both laughed. And Poppy went back down. I think she was the first.
Let me ask you, what was
Claire?
Oh.
We used to call her Poppy because her name was Claire Popham.
Right. Let me ask you, Ken, what was the intended time period? Like when you did this, how long did you think it would take that people would be on the program?
Just a few weeks.
Just a few weeks, right? Not months and years.
No, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah, it was nothing.
And it was intended, the intention was to basically clean the person up, to make them a better staff member. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, now let me ask you, there's a couple other things that were in the RPF flag order about wearing black, must run everywhere, cannot speak unless spoken to. Where did that come from, and why did you have that in there?
That was also part of what I thought would be the acceptable Sea Org culture and tradition.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about the black was that they were in a lower condition. They were in liability. I mean, just looking at it without really getting into anything specific,
Mm-hmm.
they were in a low condition because they were caisson post and had to be taken off post and out of the crew to get themselves sorted out and straightened out and back on the crew. So the black thing, and I think I was, and the running about, that was just to, just to emphasize that they had work to do.
Mm-hmm.
They had changes to make, and that they were not really off post and not working hard as a member of the crew as a reward, but they were there to work and get themselves up to being back on the crew.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so sorry,
I don't know that I would put that in nowadays, but it seemed not inappropriate then. And if anybody had been really unhappy about it, I would have certainly considered changing it.
Right. And then, my experience also from, my time in the Sea organization is the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, became a workforce more so than a correction program, because anytime we needed to have renovations done or anything like that, it was the RPF who was the manpower to do that. I mean, when we had to build a studio at the Gillham Hot Springs, the RPF, they would be abused. They basically would work around the clock because they were in lower conditions to the group. And it became very abusive because that was the only workforce that would be allowed. You know what I mean? We could not hire professional contractors to do that sort of thing. And so a lot of these people that were in the RPF, it depended upon where you were at, meaning your location. If you were in LA, it was different than if you were in Clearwater, than if you were at Gillham Hot Springs, which we had the RPF there sometimes, but then sometimes it would be sent down to LA. So it was back and forth. But it became a workforce. That's number one. Then number two, it became a personnel pool, because this is in later years, because you had a large group. Sometimes the RPF would be over 100 people, you know what I mean, in a given location. Well, Sea Org executives would look at this as like, oh, I've got to man up an area, so maybe I'll get RPF people reprieved and then man up my area. So it became a resource, unfortunately, for executives to, man up their area. Am I right, Janis?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. It was
I can
definitely
tell you how I think it got out of control.
Okay.
I was first come when I set it up. I had no real line into the RPF anywhere other than on the ship or at Clearwater. I didn't have juniors out in pack that I could order around. I could have issued orders through CS7, but, that didn't seem to be very workable. But what happened really was they bought the big blue building.
Right. In Los Angeles.
Yes. The LRH was off the ship. And he was very interested in this building and getting it set up for operation. So he was issuing orders into PAC.
That's Pacific Area Command. That's the Los Angeles area.
In Los Angeles. And these people were getting orders from the Commodore. And it must have gotten them really excited, because here they had a chance to show the Commodore how they could make it go right. This became, I think, the big priority. Do whatever we have to do to get his orders done so we can shine in his eyes and he can be pleased with us. So that's, I think, why they commandeered the RPF and worked the RPF down into the ground.
Right.
And completely ignored what I had written about how the RPF was to be run and managed, because the priority was to please the Commodore. I was going to say something and I've forgotten what it was.
That's okay. On the ship, was the RPF, was it relatively short with Janis when people were on the RPF? Were they on there for a long period of time, or
No,
would
not
they
a
get through their
long time at
programs?
all. Not a long time at all. It was actually very short, and they got their 5 hours training and study or auditing every single day. It was monitored that way, and it went per the flag orders Ken wrote. But I do remember walking on the deck with the Commodore, and we ran into the bosun at the time, and he was telling the Commodore how great the whole program was working, and that they've now added, if someone wasn't in present time and they did something wrong, they send them on a lap. And that was added by the bosun at that time. That was not something in Ken's original issues.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I heard, Ken, is it true? L. Ron Hubbard, he didn't write the issue. You wrote it, and but somebody told me, I think Terry told me, that L. Ron Hubbard came up with the idea for the RPF's RPF. Is that right?
Yes, that was his idea. Yes, that was just a few days after it was formed. They put, I think Jan Moreau got assigned to the RPF, and she put up such a fuss that it caused a flap, and he heard about it, and then he created the RPF's RPF and put her in it. Let me add something about this scene in PAC. I heard about what they were doing to the RPF, and I disagreed with it, and I wanted to change it, and I wanted to say something, but I knew that if I did, I was going to be open to the people in LA going direct to L. Ron Hubbard and saying, LRH Presscom is counter-intention to our getting this building fixed.
Yeah, so, that's exactly correct. That would happen.
Yeah, so I felt.
Well, and then the other major fill-up of the RPF was the L1RS era, the List 1R Rock Slam era, right?
Yes.
Because that's when I joined the Sea Org, and I was in Clearwater, and there was a huge RPF living in the garage at the Fort Harrison Hotel.
I was in it.
Pardon me?
I was in it.
Yeah, I know. I was going to ask you about that. But basically, the L1RS period was, there's a List 1 was like a list, I think it was like of Scientology figures and terms and things like that. And basically, they would be audited or security checked on it. And if a rock slam was a needle phenomenon that L. Ron Hubbard said, that person has insanity or unhandled evil purposes or intentions in that area if a rock slam showed up. So if you rock slammed on a List 1 item, which could be L. Ron Hubbard or Commodore or Sea Organization, then you were immediately sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force. Is that right, Ken? Yeah. Janis, do you remember that period?
Oh, I definitely remember, because I went to the RPF as a List 1 RSer.
Right, and then you refused to go, right?
I refused to go. I was assigned to the RPF's RPF, and I still refused.
Yeah.
Well, and then I remember it was resolved by saying that the auditors really were looking at dirty needles and not RSs, so it was like not necessarily valid. These people were L1 RSers. Is that right? Did you remember that, Ken?
No.
Yeah, I remember, because Kimma brought it up to the Commodore saying something is wrong. This is more than 2%. And
yeah, I mean, these are people that were Sea Org members that had signed a billion-year contract to clear the planet and help Scientology, and yet, they're evil towards L. Ron Hubbard and all that. It makes no sense,
Well, I'd worked for him for 10 years, and here I am being told I've got evil purposes towards Mary Sue.
Right. Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah. Now, Ken, you actually went to the RPF. What happened, and how long did it take for you that you were in there?
I had been sec checked, because when LRH sent down an order to the personal PRO, who was Liz Gablehouse at the time, and this was after Mary Sue had been, and the Guardian's people had been charged with criminally, with the crimes against the government. He sent down an order saying that there was to be no announcement to the press from him about Mary Sue and her situation with the authorities.
Right.
And he had, at the same time, he sent me an order to put together a pack of things he had issued forbidding the activities that Mary Sue and the GO had been up to. And to tell you the truth, this made me feel rather nauseated. First of all, because he knew what she was doing.
Right.
Second of all, he had ordered her to do it. And here he was saying, first of all, cover my ass, and then saying, I will not stand up for her. This made me really angry, personally angry with him. So I was really conflicted about it. I was really upset, and I decided what I would do is I would have Liz draw up a press release, saying how much he supported her, and I would just put that in the filing cabinet and forget about it. And that would kind of soften my feelings. Unfortunately, and Liz didn't want to do it because she'd been ordered otherwise, but I forced her and she did it. And somehow that ended up in his in basket, which hadn't been intended. So she was put in the RPF because of this. She was sack-checked and put in the RPF, and then I was sack-checked. And I knew at the end of this sack-check, I knew from the auditor's demeanor that something was going on. And it took them 2 weeks at the CMO to get around to actually figuring out how to handle me. Why it was a problem, I don't know. Anyway, they get me in the RPF. I find out later that the person who had audited me on the sec check and said I had RS had done his auditor's report for him and then said, no, it was not an RS. That was wrong. I made a mistake. It's not an RS. And he was told to forget it by the CMO CW. So I was put in the RPF, and they handled me very nicely. When I was first put in there, I was very interpolated. And I remember Sandra Johnson had been in the RPF, and she was the ethics officer, I think. Well, yeah. She took me out of the Fort Harrison down to the beach for a break, and we talked together, and she made me feel more comfortable. And obviously, I think she was checking me out to see if I was going to blow or I was maybe suicidal or something. But she was okay with that, so I went back and I got assigned a buddy who tracked me everywhere. I couldn't sleep. I was getting review sessions, and I kept saying to them, I don't need another L1C. I need a clearing course correction list and an OT correction list. Eventually, that was agreed to, and I had the correction list done by one of the RPF advanced course auditors, and those two lists handle all of my interpolation completely. And it turned out that the interpolation wasn't mine. It was somebody else's that I had picked up, somebody that was involved in the evolution that got me in. So the next interesting thing is that the RPF, all 120 and more of us, were mustered in the garage, the parking garage of the Fort Harrison. And Frankie Friedman, who was working with the CMO Clearwater on this project of getting all these List 1 arresters into the RPF, he came out onto the steps and he addressed us. And he said, there's an amnesty from LRH. And the terms are, all you need to do is to say that you're leaving, and you can leave with no freeloader bill. And I thought to myself, well,
leave the C organization, right? Leave the C organization?
With no freeloader bill. And the freeloader bill was the bill they sent you for every Scientology service you had received when in the Sea Org, because you'd received it for free. So now you were leaving, you owed for that service. And I had a lot of auditing, and most of it was CS by L. Ron Hubbard.
Mm-hmm.
So my freeloader bill would have been huge. So I thought to myself, that suits me. I think I'll take it. But then I suddenly had a realization, because I knew L. Ron Hubbard. And this had LRH all over it. And what he was going to do was, if I accepted this amnesty, he was going to issue an international order all over the planet saying that Urquhart was the WHO. And I thought to myself, no way.
Make you the scapegoat, right?
Yeah. The scapegoat of all time. So I thought, no, I'm not going to let him do that. So I stayed.
Which he later did to David Mayo, but that's another story.
Yeah. Yes, very different story. But I stayed also because I realized that if I could get into tech in the RPF, that would let me get into, when I graduated, that would open the door to my getting into tech in Clearwater.
Right.
And that's what I really always wanted, to be an auditor.
Right.
So that's how it worked out.
So let me ask you, how did you experience the RPF program once you got into it and were into it and having to run and do all the different things? What were your feelings about it, since you were the one who wrote the issue originally that created it?
It wasn't difficult. The only difficult thing was to consider myself in the RPF.
Mm-hmm.
I never could believe I was in the RPF.
Right.
I was with the RPF,
mm-hmm.
but I was never in it.
Did you get a twin? Did you get a twin, and did you guys eventually graduate?
I don't think I had a twin because I wasn't add courses. I was OT3 and above.
But you didn't. So you didn't have somebody you had to audit to get out, and they audited you?
Wait a minute. Yes, I did have sessions. I remember now. I did have sessions.
Okay.
Yes. What they were about, I don't remember.
And then did you graduate, or were you reprieved to become an auditor? Didn't you eventually become a Ned for OT's auditor?
Yes, I did. But that happened this way. I was the review auditor for the RPF.
Mm-hmm.
And the NOT HGC had been set up and had been running for several months. They had a DFP, and they had a DFP for interviews. And the DFP for interviews was overloaded.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided I was going to be the second DFP for interviews in the NOT HGC.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just pulled out and put on that post. And while I was on it, I was trained up. I got my new certificates up to class 4. And after that, I did the advanced courses specialist check sheet, which qualified me to audit NOTs. Right.
Just to bring the viewers up to speed, Ned for OTs was discovered, or whatever. It was put out in late 79 or 80, and it created a boom. I mean, the Flag Land Base pre-clears and people were coming from all over the world to get this auditing. It was a new level. It was new this, new that. And so personnel were needed. I was the LRH Com Estates at that time. And basically we had to set up space for it. We had to get personnel. And so a lot of people were taken out of the Rehabilitation Project Force and put into those positions, right, Ken?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it made millions and millions of dollars. I mean, that was the priority at the time. And it was basically, a lot of people point to it as being the biggest boom in Scientology was when Ned for Ortiz was released.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, Ken, let me ask you a final question about the RPF, okay? I did the RPF myself. I got assigned because I was disaffected, which was a bunch of BS, but I went, and immediately I was like questioning everything I had to do in the Sea organization, because it was like, this was the worst thing that a Sea Org member could be threatened with, or actually go in a Sea Org member's mind, was going to the RPF, right? And what turned me around was when I got assigned to a twin, somebody that I was going to have to get out, and developed a relationship with that person. And then I got to the point where, like, I'm actually getting sleep. I'm getting auditing. I'm moving along here, and yeah, I'll stay, But I got through the RPF program, and in the days that I did it, we had to do the running program where we had to run 12 hours a day, 7 days a week until we finished. I did do that for 51 days because it was required. It was a brand new pilot program that L. Ron Hubbard had developed, and anybody who came from the international base who went to the RPF had to complete that before they could graduate. So I did that program in 51 days, and then did all my auditing and co-auditing, all that. So I went in at Thanksgiving time in November of 1982, and I graduated by April of 1983. So I was out in 4 months, including doing almost 2 months running. Okay.
Right.
And so I was in and out. I mean, it really wasn't that long. It didn't take that long. But
No.
of course, years later, it got changed. So we'll go over that here in a second here. I'm just going to show something, as a matter of fact. It got changed in 1997. David Miscavige, as part of his golden age of technology, put out in 1997 a whole revision to your RPF flag order. And instead of doing the read it, drill it, do it, because I wasn't a trained auditor, you read it, you drilled it, and you audited your twin on it, right? Instead of that, he made it where they had to get a video pass. They basically had to become professional auditors, and they had to audit and do their training to the point where they got a video pass from the Religious Technology Center before they could audit their twin or do anything like that. So it added years. People they were on the Rehabilitation Project Force for years. First time I heard about this was well after I'd left, that Chuck Beatty, a guy named Chuck Beatty, he'd been on for like 7-8 years, and I could not believe it. So Miscavige completely bastardized the program. And I'm not raving about the program overall. I mean, the purpose and intention was to correct people and get them back on the job. 3 to 4 months, for me, it wasn't a big deal, right? Other people, it was definitely an ordeal. So my question to you is, okay, a lot of people that watch these channels and were in the Sea organization, they had a hard time in the RPF and they didn't want to go do it. And it was like the worst time in Scientology. And I'm wondering, I know you've heard these stories. Do you have any regrets now, years later, regarding creating the RPF program? And if so, what are they?
As I said, I had some regrets about some of the things I put in the original program.
Mm-hmm.
Having created a method by which people who wanted to could improve what they needed to improve with regard to the group's estimation of where they were at and so on, get back in the group and be working with that group. No, I have no regrets at all. That I introduced that format into the Sea Org as a whole without any control from me, that I regret. Because it passed into the hands of people who abused it, and abused it thoroughly, perverted it, and made it a thing of torture.
Right.
Yeah, I regret that.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah, I
I do
agree.
want to,
Go ahead, Janice.
Mark, I do want to bring up, before Ken did the Rehabilitation Project Force, we did have on the ship the deck project force. So when people got busted, they went to the decks.
Uh-huh.
And they were supposed to be put through auditing programs, and many stayed on the decks a long time because you had to wait for a regular auditor to audit you. Where what Ken did was to speed that up by doing the co-audit.
Okay. Is that right, Ken? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, like I said, once I could, because I could co-audit, I wasn't a trained auditor, I was able to get through quickly, and I was back on post, and away we went,
Did you
like
did you
you
feel?
said, pardon?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You finish what you're
No,
saying.
I was just going to say, look, that was the culture. That was what we accepted as Sea Org members. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, if you're in the Army or the military and you go to war, you know what you're going to have to do, and you accept the punishments and what's involved with that. Otherwise, you never joined, right? And as Sea Org member, I knew about the RPF before I joined the Sea Org, so it was accepted as a Sea Org member that you possibly could do that. But like you said, there were people who twisted it and made it a long-term punishment. The L1 RS rock slam period, right? The we need personnel to build things. We need to man up these things, and we're going to take away these people from the areas where they are, and we'll put them someplace else. Let's make it 7, 8, 9 years. Those people were the ones who really twisted its original purpose and intention, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right.
How about you, Janice? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Yes.
Yeah, but you didn't want to go, right?
Oh, no, I did, and that's another story in itself. But yeah.
Well, I'll be honest with you. I didn't want to go either. And when they told me I was going, I disagreed. I mean, I think every person who was assigned to the RPF, they disagreed with it. It wasn't like I just
No, Paul agreed. Paul was so happy to go to the RPF from having been action chief. He was like, I need a break. And he considered the RPF as a break compared to his post.
Right.
Well, and that's true too. I mean, there's people who got assigned to do manual labor too. They were like, oh, finally I get to be outdoors and get to do something after a day or two. I mean, there was things that were therapeutic about doing, just cleaning your house is therapeutic. It brings you closer to present time, basically, as they say, and you feel better and stuff.
Okay. Mark, I have a question for you.
Yeah, sure, Ken.
Did you feel any benefit from the RPF, or was it just a waste of time?
No. I mean, I got benefit from it, obviously. I mean, look, people have different opinions that are going to watch this show. I got benefits from the running program. People think I'm crazy, but I got a lot of benefits from that. I don't know if you ever experienced it, but I did.
No, I didn't.
And I had a lot of experience, a lot of benefits from it. I also benefited from, basically, my twin was a woman named Stacy Brooks, who we became, friends for, you become attached. And basically, she was with me, and I felt good, helping her, and I'm sure she felt the same helping me.
Great. Good.
Yeah. I don't know if we lost Janice or not. Do you see her?
No, she'll go to a circle.
Yeah, she'll come back. Anyway, Ken, so let me ask you this. Okay, now that we're at the end here. So how are you dealing? Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. Somebody asked me, what was the final straw? What made you finally leave the Sea organization? What happened? Were you kicked out and declared, or did you leave on your own? What was your circumstances on that?
I was unhappy about the Sea Org being in the Sea Org since, I think, the day LRH left the ship to go to New York.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't, as I said, I never volunteered.
Yeah.
I did actually sign a contract later, but under circumstances that, I didn't really have much. I didn't want to sign it, but I didn't have much choice at that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't. I hated the way. I hated the direction LRH was taking us in after he came back in '73.
Yeah.
I thought that we were going further and further away from Scientology. I didn't want to be there, but
Yeah.
I was in that situation very close to him and to Mary Sue. I hesitated to leave for a number of reasons, mainly that I felt that if I were to leave after being such a long time close to him, then people might lose some confidence in him, wonder what was going on.
Right.
And the answer to that might have been to make me very wrong. And that would have meant my being outside of the org and back in what they used to call civilian life,
Mm-hmm.
with the GO after me.
Yeah.
And I had some awareness of what they were doing to Paulette Cooper. And I just wasn't going to get myself into that.
Right.
So I never really took things into my own control. I coasted. I'm kind of sorry to say, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we moved ashore to Clearwater, I was still on the same post. I had the same title, but I really stopped doing things because the CMO were running around doing lots.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to get in competition with them. Eventually, I was, as you said, I was in the RPF. Then I was out being an auditor, and that took my mind off everything. Once I got into tech in the flagship org, I was very busy, and I became a good auditor, a good NOTS auditor.
Yeah.
Which is really what I wanted all along. Then things were starting to get very unpleasant for staff. There were so many seniors. There were so many generals running the army. It was a pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
And I was aging. I was getting towards 50. And I was thinking to myself, one of these days I'm going to get real old and not able to work a lot.
Right.
What are they going to do? These young people.
Yeah.
I'm going to end up in a dorm with a lot of other old people who can't do much anymore. And I'll be at the complete mercy of these younger people who are so gung-ho on getting their stats up.
Right.
Whether I better leave.
Right.
So and then at the same time, I'm concerned because I know there were people for whom I had been a stable terminal for quite a while, and I didn't want them to be disturbed by my leaving. I wanted them to make up their own minds about whether they left or stayed, and to leave under their own determinism, not
Right.
because I had left.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to figure out a way to leave quietly, and that got interfered with when the new organization was formed. What was it called?
Religious Technology Center?
RTC, yes.
Yeah.
They arrived at Clearwater to reorganize things.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things they did was to call for a tech muster of all tech people in the late afternoon. So I was there, and as was my custom, I moved towards the back of the room,
Mm-hmm.
and Jeff Walker came to me and he says, "Get up to the front." So I knew something was in the air, and Vicky Azanaran addressed the auditors. I can't remember what she said, but she ended up by turning to me and pointing to me and say, you're disaffected. And she implied that I needed to get a sex check, get my ovaries off, and then make up my mind to do that or to leave. So she ended the meeting. I went up to have my evening meal, and I decided, okay, she's given me the choice, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And during the course of the evening, I don't know what was going on, but they changed, and then they decided I would have to have a sex check after all, immediately.
Right.
So I was put down with the RPF to have my sex check. I wasn't assigned to the RPF, but they were going to sex check me. I was to live with the RPF. As it happened, the RPF were on a night schedule.
Uh-huh.
They were doing renovations of some kind. So I was up all night. And then some guy comes to me in the next day and wants to audit me. And I say, I've been up all night. I haven't had any sleep. Doesn't matter. I've got to be sex checked. So this went on for a few days. I was not sleeping, but I think they just got tired of trying to sex check me with no sleep, and they gave up. Then the final thing was, Irene Howie she was then Irene Durman. She was
Right.
the bosun of the RPF,
Mm-hmm.
and we were eating I think lunchtime, and she got up and said, Urquhart and Friedman to the bosun's office. So Frankie Friedman and I go to the bosun's office.
I'm adding Janis back in here. Hi, Janis, you're back.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. My new computer just crashed.
Oh, dear. Okay.
We've been holding the fort. Ken is telling us about how he finally left. Go ahead, Ken.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so Janis, I'd been with the RPF for a couple of days being sex checked because I was disaffected. This was when Vicky Asnaran and the rest of RTC came to Flag in late 82. So I was being sex checked. They got through the sex check somehow, and I was with the RPF at lunch, and Irene Durman, who had been Irene Howie, rose up and called me and Frankie Friedman to the bosun's office, where three of us went, Irene and Frankie and me, and Vicky Asnaran came in. She stared at Frankie Friedman and she says, you're declared, pack your bags and leave this base. Then she turned to me and said, you, pack your bags and leave this base.
But she didn't declare you?
Eh?
Did she declare you?
I was declared later by Ray Midhoff.
Oh, okay.
the
first declare. So that was my exit from Flag. And I felt a great relief.
Yeah.
You know, Ken, the two things I was going to say on your story, right? You know, you mentioned how you got to be an auditor and that's basically what you wanted to do all along. That was me too. I mean, I always wanted to be an auditor. That's why I got in the Sea organization. But of course, I never ever became that because I became a competent executive. And it's just, you know, I thought that was funny. But then the other thing too, Janis, and I'm sure you agree this, you know, Vicky Asnaran coming in there as part of the new RTC, that was all during that time period when the finance police was going in and declaring mission holders and taking their money. I mean, it was like a reign of terror. And, you know, I'm sure Miscavige was behind the whole thing, but I'm sure he wanted anybody who had L. Ron Hubbard connections like you, who had been, you know, with him for so many years, Frankie Friedman. It was like, get them out of here and get them declared. They were easy. They just wanted you out of the way.
Well, at that time, I was actually declared at the gold base. I was the only person on the base declared. And my job was gopher in charge, catching gophers and mowing the lawns.
Yeah.
Because I
was
so
a crazy time period.
Yeah.
Yes. Frankie told me later that he got declared because one of his friends whom he had audited regularly at Flag, a woman, I've forgotten her name. She wrote to him a letter when he was in the RPF, knowing it would be read, and she was telling him, she was agreeing with him on some plan that he had told her about to take over the church or something like that, which she had made up completely. It was all false, but she had done that so as to get him expelled.
Wow.
Amazing.
Crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Crazy day.
Yeah.
Well, and then you then continued on, as we talked about in your last interview, auditing out in the real world, right, for years and years.
Eventually,
and years.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of this interview, Ken. It's been very enlightening and very helpful, and I hope we didn't ask you too many tough questions. But people want to know these things. They want to know about the RPF. They want to know about what happened and why, and we're trying to put that information out for people to judge for themselves.
Good.
And our next, Ken, we're going to do another interview with you, and we'll answer people's questions that come up from this one. But I also want to touch on the SO1 line.
Right.
Because a lot of people have asked about that. And
That's
I
right.
feel it's important everyone knows the truth on how that worked.
Right.
And for anybody who doesn't know, the SO1 line was letters sent to L. Ron Hubbard by public and how they got answered.
Yeah.
Right.
So please both know and let anybody else know I'm open to all kinds of questions.
Okay,
Doesn't matter
great.
how hard they are.
Great, Ken. Hey, listen, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we end off here?
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ken. And sorry I disappeared for a few minutes there.
Okay, we survived without you.
I know, I see that.
I got some business to take care of. Please subscribe to our channel. Like I mentioned before, click that like button if you like this interview. Some great information, stuff you're not going to hear anywhere else. Go ahead and like our channel, subscribe to it and hit notifications. And then this 2-hour interview here, if you've got any questions that you want us to ask Ken or ask us, Janis and I, we go through the comment section and we will answer your questions. So if you've got anything that you'd like to ask, please do so and ask away. Okay. Anyway, we want to thank everybody for sticking around and watching. And Janis, anything else you wanted to say?
No, I will see you next time. We continue to enjoy these, and please keep subscribing and sticking with us.
Okay, great. I'm going to play the end video here. Ken, stay on the line. We'll talk to you as soon as we get off here, okay?
Okay.
Bye, everybody.